Hello, I am Raymond Shadow. Imagine, friends. Turn back time more than 2,000 years to ancient Athens, Greece. On a bright, sunny afternoon, Plato and his philosopher buddies are sitting around in a circle, discussing questions with great fervor, as was their custom. You know, in that era, questioning the definitions of things was very much in vogue. The topic they were discussing that day was incredibly grand, yet also incredibly close to every single one of us. That topic was, what is a human being? What does it truly mean to be a human? How should we precisely define the concept of human? They sat there arguing for a long time, throwing out all sorts of theories. Some said humans have souls, others said humans are rational. Finally, they reached a conclusion that everyone was quite satisfied with. They sat there nodding at each other, thinking this definition was simply perfect. Their ultimate answer to this question was, man is a featherless biped. The logic was perfect, right? So, they reveled in the glory of this definition. Patting each other on the back, feeling they had finally solved a universe-level riddle. Just then, the door was suddenly kicked open. Diogenes the cynic, that eccentric who lived in a barrel, stormed in panting, holding a chicken that had just been plucked clean of its feathers. He threw the bald chicken onto the ground and shouted, "Behold! I've brought you a man!" The room instantly went dead silent. Everyone looked awkwardly at the shivering chicken. While this story sounds like a joke, it depicts the first time philosophers began to seriously raise a specific type of question. This type of question eventually evolved into a massive branch of philosophy, which is the core of what we are going to talk about today, ontology. You might think this sounds dry, but please bear with me, because this relates to how you view yourself and how you view this world. Ontology is the foundational branch of philosophy. When asked questions like, what does it mean to be a person, it isn't just looking for a biological definition. Ontology asks about something deeper. What does it mean for a thing to be? What is existence? When we say something is, what on earth does that mean? At what point does something count as existing, and at what point does it count as not existing? I know this sounds a bit convoluted. Let's use a more concrete example. Suppose one day you go to a petting zoo. You meet a goat there. You feed it some alfalfa pellets, and it chews them with gusto. Now, many people looking at that goat would view the goat's existence as a self-evident matter. It's right there. It has weight, color, a smell. Of course it exists. For the sake of today's discussion, let's just admit that. Okay, the goat does exist. It is. But once ontology steps in, things get complicated. What exactly does existence mean? When we point at that goat and say it exists, what exactly are we trying to express? What standard are we using? Is it the space it occupies? Is it its reflection of light? Or is it the texture you can touch? This leads to more questions. What is the nature of existence itself? Is existence an attribute of that goat, just like it being white or having horns? If it is an attribute, then what is the foundation that allows that goat to exist in that place? If these questions aren't enough to confuse you, let's push it a step further. Suppose you leave the petting zoo, go home, lie on the sofa, and start thinking about that goat. Let's say you really, particularly like that goat, maybe even fell a little in love with it. Damn it, now you are daydreaming about it every moment. Whatever you do, this goat lingers in your mind. So here comes the question, would you say that thought about the goat exists? When you stop thinking about that thought, does it cease to exist? Are thoughts merely fleeting patterns of electrochemical activity in the brain? Or do thoughts, as a kind of entity, exist in the same way the goat exists as an entity, or a rock exists as an entity? I want you to think deeply, what is the real difference between that thought and that goat? You might retort, well, to me they are completely different because I know one is just a thought, it's illusory, while the other is a real biological creature. Okay. Then what if you accidentally took a powerful hallucinogen and you had an incredibly realistic hallucination? You feel like you and that goat ran away to Las Vegas together and you even got married with Elvis as the witness. When you are walking down the red carpet with that goat, in that moment, for you, it feels just as real as being in the petting zoo, perhaps even more unforgettable. The question is, when you finally stop hallucinating, the drug wears off, and you recall the memory of your honeymoon in Guam with your new goat partner, can that entire experience be said to have existed in some way? If it didn't exist, why did it feel so real to you? If it did exist, where did it exist? We've all experienced similar moments before, sure, maybe not about goats, but we've all asked ourselves late at night these kinds of questions about what constitutes the existence or non-existence of something. Philosophers throughout history have also been wandering around here in this field known as ontology. I know, there must be some friends who hear these kinds of questions and don't really feel much. You might say, look, I like studying philosophy, I like wisdom that can guide my life, like Nietzsche's Übermensch philosophy, or the Stoic dichotomy of control. That's interesting and useful. But ultimately, I like learning philosophy that truly enriches my life. What practical benefit can I get from this poetic and brain-burning discussion about whether a hypothetical goat exists? Isn't this just having too much time on my hands? That's fair. Actually, that is a very normal reaction. Most people would think this is absurd. But the person we are going to talk about today, one of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century, believed that these seemingly useless ontological questions are not only important, but are the most important, and simultaneously the most neglected, questions in the history of philosophy. His name is Martin Heidegger. To explain to you why he thought these questions were so important, and why he believed figuring out being is the key to solving all problems, requires us to peel back the layers analytically. But I promise you, by the time we finish chatting, you will not only have these obscure questions to ponder, but you will also possess a completely new way of life, an existentialist way of life proposed by Heidegger, which some even consider the greatest ever. But as the saying goes, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. To understand the massive and complex intellectual edifice of Heidegger, where should we take the first step? We have to start where Heidegger started, which is the beginning of his career. Because to understand where his innovations in the field of ontology came from, we must understand the revolutionary method invented by his teacher. Interestingly, his teacher actually didn't care about ontology at all. His name was Edmund Husserl. And the revolutionary method Husserl invented is called phenomenology. Husserl was like a mad scientist of the philosophy world. This genius who appeared in the early 20th century created massive chaos in the field of philosophy. I suppose strictly speaking that makes him a mad philosopher, but make no mistake, his significance to philosophy and traditional philosophers is just like the significance of those mad scientists in sci-fi movies, wearing white coats and creating earth-shattering experiments, to the traditional scientific community. He is like a mad scientist because, yes, on some metaphorical level, he is still wearing a lab coat. He is still conducting experiments. But the experiments he conducts aren't the kind traditional scientists would do in test tubes and beakers. He conducts these experiments in a singular place deep within his own mind, like in his own private underground lair. And I think most importantly, the reason he does these experiments is completely different from the reason normal scientists do experiments. My favorite thing about Husserl as a philosophical figure is the pure way he approached his work. He didn't care about questions like what is the meaning of my life, or how should we act, or what is the best form of government. No, Husserl was a philosopher with a background in mathematics. Although he believed his work would eventually provide answers to such questions, he personally was interested in only one thing, and one thing only, certainty. You see, Husserl keenly noticed a problem. He noticed that all these great philosophers in history, from Plato to Kant, all tried to find a way to obtain objective truth about things. But look at the result. Thousands of years have passed, and philosophers are still arguing endlessly, never arriving at an answer as certain as a mathematical formula. He realized that their strategy to achieve this was basically the same. They all came up with their own unique, creative ways to look at the world. This one looks slightly different from the last one, that one corrects a little bit more. Their goal was to correct past assumptions to get us closer to certainty. But perhaps their failure can be explained by the fact that their strategy for accomplishing this monumental task was wrong from the start. Perhaps the problem isn't that we need a new pair of glasses to look at the world. Maybe we shouldn't look at the world differently, but instead look at the way we look at the world differently. This sounds a bit twisted, but this is exactly Husserl's starting point. Remember Kant? Remember Hume? We've talked before about how we obtain human experience of the world. The senses capture a burst of seemingly random raw phenomena, a light, sound, touch. If left to themselves, it would be quite chaotic. But we filter these phenomena through various mental faculties, categories of the mind, helping us classify and understand them, things like space, time, causality, etc. This constitutes our subjective human experience. If this problem isn't solved, if you are Husserl, one thing is certain: if we ever really found some method that could give us objective truth about things, it would ultimately have to be filtered through this very narrow subjective human experience we possess. It's like you are wearing a pair of blue glasses. No matter what you see, it is blue. If you don't first study the glasses, how can you be sure of the original color of what you see? So, Husserl's phenomenological method isn't about looking at the world differently. It's not even necessarily about looking at the world. It's about taking an exhaustive, close-up look at the lens through which we must perceive objects. Human consciousness, or our subjective experience of the world. Phenomenology is a method designed to better understand the underlying structure of human thought. Husserl hoped that one day, we wouldn't just have an understanding of these objects in our minds, which was the strategy of many philosophers before him. Instead, perhaps we could obtain certainty about these raw phenomena and how they relate to each other by understanding all the ways our human experience of the world distorts reality. In other words, for years all these philosophers tried to gain objectivity by standing on the sidelines, looking at the world like some objective third party. But human experience is never objective. Husserl is saying here, you can never gain certainty about anything unless you have a deeper understanding of the subjective lens through which you observe everything. Here I want to emphasize a maxim, the core question of phenomenology. This will help us understand why Heidegger would later commit that betrayal-like transcendence of his teacher. The question is it possible that we are so familiar with this daily process of simply perceiving the world that this familiarity blinds our ability to see the world clearly? Now, thinking about this possibility isn't the default state we find ourselves in as humans, right? I mean, most of us don't sit there thinking about the underlying structure of human thought. We just think about things. What to eat in the morning, how to do our job, why that girl won't text me back. Most of us don't look for the objective truth of things like philosophers. We just have certain beliefs. If they work, they work. If they don't work, what do? We walk into your mental closet, turn off all the lights, scream idiot, 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 and then what? You come out of the closet, revise your beliefs into another flawed interpretation of the world, and continue your life until you have to revise them again. This attitude of blindly accepting from birth that there is a world out there separate from us, and thinking our job is to reveal truths about that world by reading more books and having more conversations. Along with the many basic assumptions accompanying this seemingly default attitude, this attitude of taking so many things for granted, this whole approach is what Husserl called the natural attitude. This is where most people spend their entire lives. We are like fish in a fishbowl, never realizing the existence of water. But this isn't a death sentence. Don't worry. Husserl believed that over time, it is possible to cultivate a phenomenological attitude toward the world. We can do this by suspending our beliefs in the natural attitude. He called this bracketing. But the main point of this is to recognize the nature of the natural attitude. It is a belief, or a set of beliefs. He isn't saying don't believe the natural attitude. He is just saying, put it aside temporarily, recognize this default state, this natural attitude might not be the only way of looking at things, and realize a very serious possibility: this might be an area where we arrive carrying many presuppositions. This is where Husserl starts to sound like a mad scientist. Right? This is where his hair starts to stick up like Bozo the Clown. Husserl believed that when you examine the natural attitude carefully enough, you start to see many biases and assumptions. These assumptions stem from the way the human mind categorizes and understands everything. When you discover these biases, he advocated noticing them, acknowledging them, and then marking them with a kind of philosophical reflective tape so that they catch your attention the next time you think about things. He believed there were two reasons for doing this. First, the likelihood of you making the same natural attitude mistake again drops significantly. Second, when you start having enough of this philosophical reflective tape partitioning the different parts of the mind we are trying to observe, eventually what happens is that the reflective tape starts to show a pattern. It starts to show you the boundaries where the natural attitude ends and the raw phenomena begin. Husserl believed that it is within these isolated zones that we can pay closer attention to what we really care about. The necessary and invariant aspects of our experience. In other words, the essence of our experience, stripped of all the value judgments we impose on experience after the fact. When you are deep in this place in your own mind, when you are in the mad scientist's lair, Husserl used many methods to try to obtain the essence of any given human experience. This might sound abstract. I really want to talk about one specific method because I want you to feel it. I want you to experience firsthand the strange world Husserl was in when doing philosophy. This bizarre method he was using aimed at obtaining certainty. This method would eventually deeply influence how Heidegger conducted his work. One strategy is called using eidetic reduction. Eidetic reduction is just a strategy Husserl used to try to reach the essence of any given experience. Now, how do we look for the essence of human experience? We've looked for the essence of things on the show before, right? A famous example passed down from Descartes is trying to find the essence of a piece of wax. You can imagine a cylindrical piece of red wax on the table in front of you. Now let's break it down. What is the essence of a piece of wax? Well, this specific wax has certain properties, right? It's red. The shape is cylindrical. It might be shiny, maybe you just bought it from the store, but maybe not. This wax has a certain smell, a certain taste. But are any of these properties necessary and invariant? These two words are extremely important in phenomenology. The necessary and invariant components of that wax. Well, we can take away the red color. If it's not red, it could still be wax. Right? This wax might smell different, it could still be wax, right? You can heat the wax, and it will melt into a shape that is no longer cylindrical, becoming a puddle of liquid, but it is still wax. Searching for the necessary and invariant components of this wax is searching for the essence of the wax. Eidetic reduction is a specific technique where you use a method called imaginative variation, or the act of creatively changing different components of something to get closer to those necessary and invariant ingredients. For example, asking questions like, what if the wax was blue? Still wax. What if the wax smelled like gingerbread men? Still wax. What if the wax was made of water? Okay, stop. Something about the wax changed. Now it doesn't seem like wax. Now can we try to figure out specifically what needs to be replaced for it to be categorized as wax again? That is, the necessary and invariant ingredients. Now imagine, instead of doing this whole process on a piece of wax, imagine doing this process on a certain experience a human has. Instead of considering color and shape and smell, changeable things we are all very familiar with, imagine the equivalent is the way your brain organizes and understands that experience. If you imagine that, you can have a rough concept of that strange, baffling world that people like Husserl and Heidegger once operated in. You can also absolutely understand why it would take a whole series of shows to fully explain what Husserl thought he was doing here. But none of that matters. None of that matters. To be able to understand where Heidegger came from, all you need to know is the basics of this new introspective philosophical method and phenomenology. The key word is introspection. Again, don't try to find a new, creative way to look at the objects of our experience, like so many philosophers did in the past. Instead, let's look deeper into what that experience is at the most fundamental level. But, just as Husserl felt he had found the key to truth, Martin Heidegger appeared. As Husserl's student, Heidegger started his career as a card-carrying phenomenologist. But it was here that he saw phenomenology ultimately running into many very serious problems. First, what exactly are you trying to do with phenomenology? You are trying to obtain an exhaustive understanding of the structure of human thought. You arrive at the structure of human thought. Heidegger thought, isn't this just an extension of the mistakes philosophers have been making throughout history? Like David Hume. You know, when David Hume wrote an inquiry concerning human understanding, who is to say that if David Hume had lived a few more years and wrote another book called An Inquiry Concerning Squirrel Understanding or An Inquiry Concerning Raccoon Understanding, who is to say that wouldn't be exactly the same book? In other words, how can we be sure that the underlying structure of human thought isn't the underlying structure of mammalian thought, or the underlying structure of all conscious thought? But there is another side to this too. What are we using to arrive at these conclusions about the architecture of human thought? Oh yes, our subjective experience of the world. Suppose we arrive at a conclusion. How can we say we are certain that this is how every human who has ever lived constructed their thoughts? Or even everyone alive today? I mean, is it hard to imagine that something like your intelligence level would affect your thought structure? Or the culture you were born into? Or the values you hold? Is it crazy to think these might have a huge impact? If these problems weren't enough, Heidegger believed Husserl made an even bigger mistake. Even if he was an undeniably brilliant thinker, Heidegger believed Husserl himself overlooked something massive. Because Husserl might have understood what lies behind the objects we experience. But what lies behind the ability to study the structure of human thought? Being. What does being mean? What does it mean to be a human? These ontological questions we've been talking about. Heidegger realized that the answers to these questions heavily influence two other areas philosophers participate in. Let's go back to what we call philosophy of subjectivity. Heidegger believed that the reason there are problems like the problem of other minds or that solipsism dilemma isn't because past philosophers weren't smart enough to come up with good ways to solve these puzzles. It's because these puzzles are bugs inherent in your philosophical system. So as long as you adopt your mode of philosophy, you are doomed to find these problems unsolvable. The typical representative of the philosophy Heidegger criticized is Descartes. And of course, Husserl's philosophy, in Heidegger's view, also couldn't escape the cliché of subjectivity philosophy. So what is subjectivity philosophy? Simply put, it is a philosophy of subject-object dichotomy. It adopts an epistemological mode. That is to say, this philosophy establishes a mode from the very beginning, which is the subject-object split, the split between the self and things. There is a knowing subject, this subject is I. This I is irreducible and indubitable. In Descartes, it's the cogito, I think. In Husserl, it's the transcendental ego. Then, this subject needs to know the objects outside of itself. The objects of knowledge. These objects include the world, and they include other people. The problem is, whether it's Descartes or Husserl, they can only start from the subject. They must take this subject as the indubitable first principle of philosophy. So, to guarantee the indubitability of this subject as the first principle, they first have to suspend the external world. That is, through universal doubt, or through Husserl's bracketing, they bury the external world and others into nothingness. Then, on the basis of this nothingness, they demand to prove that the external world and others exist. Heidegger thought this was simply absurd. Like Descartes, who first pulled a sudden bizarre maneuver to doubt the whole world away, leaving only the cogito, a lonely mind contemplating there alone, fearful, and then spent half a day deducing that, oh, it turns out God is guiding me, only then relaxing and entrusting himself to the world. In Heidegger's view, isn't this superfluous? Isn't this creating a problem where there wasn't one? This world existed perfectly fine, why suspend it? You tell me. It's as if this traditional subjectivity philosophy played a game. And right at the start, you chose the wrong mode. You chose a so-called epistemology mode, locking yourself in a closed cabinet to observe the outside. So you chose wrong at the start. No matter how you play later, no matter how superb your gameplay is, because your starting mode is wrong, you can never escape the bugs inherent in the system. So the work Heidegger wanted to do was to carry out a revolution in philosophical modes, a complete system swap. Heidegger discovered that when he examined the history of ontology in the Western philosophical canon. Almost every philosopher who ever lived seemed to share this mutual consensus. And in Heidegger's view, such consensus started to look quite suspicious. What does it mean to be a person? In the past, it was always some variation, usually the same thing. We are rational animals, a conscious subject temporarily and uneasily navigating this realm, this external world that has existed for billions of years and will continue to exist with or without us. This is the root of the subject-object dichotomy. But what about this whole idea? This whole idea that we are this person thing, this conscious subject navigating a realm separate from us, this idea of a subject and object relationship of existence, what if this is a massive assumption? An assumption philosophers have been making almost from the very beginning? What if it is? Heidegger thought, yes, it's weird that people seem to all agree on this. So he went back and checked the arguments people used to justify this ontological stance. Like Descartes. Descartes tried to doubt everything about his existence that could possibly be doubted. He famously concluded that while you can initially doubt almost everything about the existence of the external world, one thing is certain, by virtue of the fact that I am thinking, I am some kind of thinking thing. Cogito, ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. This is the fundamental thing you can know about your existence. He would base his entire philosophical system on this. But Heidegger says, wait a minute. Descartes. You skipped something extremely important there. Your first experience of your own existence isn't that you are a thinking thing, or even capable of making abstract generalizations like what you are. Premised on that is that something must be there before that. No. When you exist, the very first experience you have is just being there. Like, hey guys, I'm here. Existing. Being there. To describe this state, Heidegger used a word. This is Dasein, being there. This isn't just a word. This is a revolution. And this revolution will completely change our understanding of who we are. Heidegger believed we are not a closed entity as Descartes said. We are an open being. We are like a radish pulled up with the mud attached, we always exist bringing a piece of the world around us with us. We exist stickily within this piece of the world. In Heidegger's words, this is called being in the world. Please note that this phrase is connected by hyphens because Heidegger believed being and world are fundamentally inseparable. Without the world, Dasein cannot exist. Without Dasein, the world cannot manifest. What is this like? Heidegger used being in love as an analogy. Being in love is a state in itself. You cannot completely strip that lover from that love. Once stripped, that state no longer exists. So we aren't like a pea packed in a box, contained in this physical world. We are like sugar dissolved in water, interwoven with this world. You are your world. Your world is you. Does this sound a bit metaphysical? Don't worry. The most amazing thing about Heidegger is that he can reduce these seemingly profound philosophies to our most trivial daily lives. Let's talk about hammers. That's right, the hammer used to hit nails. This is one of Heidegger's most famous examples. Imagine when you act as a carpenter, or even when you are repairing furniture at home, you pick up a hammer. In that moment, what is your experience of this hammer? Do you stare at it like a scientist, analyzing what molecules its wooden handle is made of? Do you think about how heavy its metal head is and what Newtonian laws it obeys? Absolutely not. Unless you've lost your mind. In the normal state of use, this hammer is almost transparent in your consciousness. You don't see the hammer at all. Your attention is entirely focused on the nail you want to drive, or the picture you want to hang on the wall. This hammer and you have merged into one. It has become an extension of your arm. You pick it up and use it, wielding it with proficiency, without needing to pass through any theoretical thinking. Heidegger calls this state ready to hand. That is, something ready to hand. This is the most primitive, most authentic way we deal with the world. We are not knowing the world, we are coping with the world. Let's take a more modern example. I know you haven't used hammers much, but you certainly can't leave your mobile phones. Think about it. You wake up every morning, grab your phone, and scroll through Twitter, Instagram, scroll through short videos. What is your state like at that time? You don't treat the phone as an object to study. You don't think about what the resolution of this screen is or how the chips inside compute. You aren't even aware of your finger sliding on the glass. Your consciousness passes directly through the phone, reaching the content inside the screen, reaching that funny joke or that news that makes you anxious. In those few hours, the phone is ready to hand. It is a transparent conduit connecting you to the world. You use it daily without knowing it. This is the most basic state of our living. This state does not require a subject-object dichotomy. There is no subject, i.e., observing an object phone. There is only a unified process of activity. So, that epistemology mode that philosophers have struggled with for thousands of years. That mode of treating the world as an objective object to study, where on earth did that come from? Heidegger tells you that is a secondary state. That is a state that only appears when things break. This is the present-at-hand state. Back to the hammer example. When you are enthusiastically hammering a nail, suddenly, the hammerhead falls off, or the handle breaks. In that instant, what happens? That smooth, transparent, ready-to-hand state is interrupted. This tool in your hand suddenly becomes heavy, strange, obstructive. Only then do you stop, hold this broken hammer in your hand, and examine it carefully. You think, oh, why is this handle made of rotten wood? Why is the head loose? Right at this moment, that subject-object dichotomy is born. You become an observing subject. The hammer becomes an observed object. You start analyzing it like a scientist. By the same token, when you are scrolling through videos and suddenly the phone goes black, freezes, or falls on the floor and the screen shatters. At this time, that transparent conduit disappears. You are left holding a cold, black brick of glass. You start to get anxious, start checking where it's broken, start thinking if the battery is dead or the chip is fried. Only then does the phone fall from the ready-to-hand state to the present-at-hand state. Traditional philosophers, like Descartes and Kant, and even Heidegger's teacher Husserl, the biggest mistake they made was treating this reflective state after things break as the default state of human existence. They thought living meant holding one's chin and contemplating there all day like a statue. This is simply reading too many books until one becomes silly. Most of our time, we are operating in the world, not gazing at the world. We are living, not doing a theoretical analysis of life. This discovery of Heidegger is simply subversive. He tells us that our understanding of the world does not come from logical reasoning in the brain, but from our existence itself. We understood the hammer before we used it. We understood the room before we walked into it. This understanding is a kind of pre-reflective, tacit grasping. It is more fundamental and primitive than any scientific knowledge. If Descartes wanted to rebuild a building on ruins, then Heidegger is telling you the building has always been there, and you live in the building. It's just that you live too comfortably, too habitually, so that you forgot the existence of the building. You only pay attention to the occasionally broken faucet in the building. Having talked about our relationship with things, we must talk about another more important topic, which is our relationship with people. This is the problem of other minds that has plagued the philosophical world for hundreds of years. What is the problem of other minds? Simply put, how can you be sure that people other than you are living people with souls and thoughts, and not designed programs or NPCs? Descartes unlucky I think, therefore I am confirmed the ith but lost the others. Because if I can only confirm the existence of my own thoughts, how can I drill into other people's heads to confirm they also have thoughts? This is the dilemma of solipsism. But with Heidegger, this problem, like the question of whether the world exists, is fundamentally a pseudo-problem. Why? Because Heidegger defined that Dasein is not only being in the world, but also being with. What does this mean? It means we never came into this world alone. From the moment we were thrown into this world, we were already with others. This being together isn't just proximity in physical distance, but a coexistence in ontological structure. I know some people will say, that's not right, Heidegger. I'm very lonely. I'm often home alone, no one asks me out on weekends. I feel like I'm the only person in the world. That's because you don't understand what Heidegger means by being with. Heidegger believes that even when you are alone, others are present. One could even say that the state of solitude proves the existence of others even more profoundly. Let's take an extreme example. Even Robinson Crusoe in Robinson Crusoe. He was on that deserted island, absolutely cut off from the world, right? But what did he rely on to survive? He relied on the supplies he moved from the shipwreck. Those muskets, gunpowder, axes, saws. Where did these things come from? They are products of human civilization. They were made by workers far away in England. When Robinson uses the axe to chop trees, he is actually being with those workers who made the axe. Every survival skill of his, every concept in his brain, even the language he uses to think, were endowed by others. He lived on the deserted island for so many years. What was his mind full of? It was all others. When he discovered a footprint on the beach, he was scared out of his wits. If he really were an absolutely lonely atom, why would he be afraid? This fear precisely proves that in his life structure, a place for others was always reserved. Heidegger has a very tongue-twisting but profound saying. He said, the other can be missing only in and for a being with. Being alone is a deficient mode of being with. Translating this sentence into that more heart-stinging saying, you feel lonely because you should have been with others. If you were born a stone, how could you feel lonely? A stone is never lonely because it never had the attribute of being with. So regarding other people in this world, we don't observe their behavior first like a scientist studying a robot, and then deduce if they have an inner mind. No. We directly grasp the existence of others. It's like when you come home from work, and your wife has made a delicious dinner for you. When you sit down to eat, do you stop first and perform a Turing test on your wife to verify if she is a robot? You won't. You directly feel her care, feel her presence. This is a pre-reflective understanding. Unless your wife behaves abnormally today. For example, she enters the door holding a bowl of Indian secret herbal soup you've never drunk, and says grimly, "Sweetheart, time for your medicine." At this time, your daily life chain breaks. Your ready-to-hand state collapses. Only then will you jump up in terror. Start reflecting, start doubting, start treating your wife as an object that needs to be studied. So you see, whether towards things or people, Heidegger kicked that cold, rational cognitive mode to the sidelines. He tells us, we are firstly alive, steamingly entangled with the world and others. That lonely, all-doubting Cartesian self is just a secondary form we conjure up in special moments, like when things break, or when philosophers go crazy. Since we are being with others from the start. Since we are not lonely at all, does this sound very warm? Do you feel Heidegger is a healing philosopher? If you think so, you are too naive. Heidegger is a grim doctor. He just gave you a reassurance pill telling you are not lonely, and immediately he is going to pick up the scalpel and cut open the chilling truth behind this not lonely. That truth is, we have been immersed in this being with others for too long, too comfortably, that we lost the most precious thing. That is, ourselves. Heidegger calls this state fallenness. Remember the concept we mentioned earlier? We are thrown into this world. You didn't choose to be born, you were thrown into this world. You were thrown into 1990s America, or 2000s South Africa. You were thrown into a specific family, specific culture, specific class. You didn't choose any of these. This constitutes your facticity. And because we are born as babies knowing nothing, needing to rely on others to survive, we naturally fell into the lifestyle of those around us. We start imitating others. We start listening to others' teachings. This was originally a necessity for survival. But the problem is, most people never climb out of this pit their whole lives. We live in a state of inauthenticity. In this state, what truly dominates our lives is not your unique self, but a monster called the they. Who is this they? It isn't a specific person. It isn't John, nor is it Paul. It is everybody. It is people. It is that average permeating the air. Think about it. Why do you want to take the college entrance exam? Because everyone thinks that is the path to a stable and normal life. Why do you get married when you reach a certain age? Because everyone says it's abnormal not to marry. Why do you post that photo you spent half an hour editing on Instagram? Because everyone likes to see an exquisite life. Heidegger pointed out extremely sharply that in this state, we are actually deprived of existence. We outsourced our right to judge, our way of life, all to this invisible and untouchable they. How do we enjoy ourselves? As they enjoy themselves. How do we read? As they read. Even how we get angry is according to the standard of how they get angry. This is the most comfortable and aesthetic. Because if you live according to the way of the they, you don't need to take any responsibility. If you fail the college exam, you can say everyone fails, it's too competitive. If you lose your job, you can say the environment is just like this, nobody can find a job. The they can most easily take responsibility for everything because it is never the one who needs to guarantee things. Have you noticed? Whenever you make a mistake or want to escape, your favorite excuse is, so-and-so does this too. Or, society is just like this. But when you want to settle accounts with this they, you will find, person not found. It is everywhere, but when you want to catch it, it slips away. We spend day after day in this muddled, drifting state of fallenness. We think this comfort is happiness. We think this clearly arranged life is stability. Until one day, an inexplicable emotion suddenly strikes. It breaks this false tranquility. Heidegger calls this emotion anxiety. Please note, anxiety here is not fear. Fear has an object. You fear snakes. You fear fire. You fear losing your job. These are concrete fears. But anxiety is different. Anxiety has no concrete object. It usually happens late at night or on some idle afternoon. Suddenly, you feel empty inside. You feel that everything before your eyes, your job, your social life, those brand name bags and electronic products you pursue, suddenly lose their meaning. You feel a profound not-at-homeness. Like you are clearly sitting in your own home. But feel like a vagrant. This feeling is terrifying because it reveals the background color of our existence, nothingness. It drags you raw out of that warm, noisy world of the they and throws you alone onto a wasteland. At this time, you are no longer that university teacher, no longer that good husband, no longer that filial daughter. You are just a naked existent facing nothingness. You can't help but ask yourself, who am I? What am I doing? Why am I here? What is the first reaction of most people when facing this anxiety? It is to run away. It's too scary. This feeling of nothingness is too scary. Quickly open the phone, scroll through short videos, look at funny jokes, or ask a few friends to go drink heavily and get drunk. We want to rush back to that familiar, livelier world of the they. We want to stuff ourselves back into those social labels to gain a sense of security. This is why modern people are so afraid of solitude. Why we can't leave our phones for a moment. Because as soon as we stop, that anxiety will catch up. But, friends, Heidegger tells us that this anxiety, although painful, is our only door to authenticity. Only when you dare to face this nothingness, only when you are no longer in a hurry to flee back to the crowd, is it possible for you to hear that call you have suppressed for a long time. That call from the depths of your life. So, how do we pass through this door? How do we stand up from this mud-like fallenness and become our true selves? Heidegger's answer might send chills down your spine. But it might also make your blood boil. That is, we must learn being towards death. This isn't just an idiom. This is the climax of Heidegger's philosophy. Let's talk about this topic that everyone avoids but everyone must face. Heidegger calls this state of facing death being towards death. Does this term sound a bit like a slogan from a passionate anime or some pessimistic, world-weary manifesto? If you think so, you've misunderstood Heidegger again. He isn't asking you to commit suicide, nor asking you to sit on a coffin board washing your face with tears all day. He wants you to understand an extremely cruel but extremely healing truth. That is, only when you truly realize you will die, do you truly begin to live. Let's first look at how we treat death in daily life. In that warm and comfortable world of the day, death is a taboo, a carefully packaged accident. We turn on the TV and see news saying an earthquake happened somewhere, a car accident happened somewhere. We shake our heads and say, "Oh my, how pitiful, people died." Please note this wording. People died. What is the subtext here? The subtext is, others died. The abstract people died. Not me. When we talk about death, we always treat it as an unfortunate event happening to others, just like talking about someone winning the lottery or losing a wallet. We objectify it. We push it far away. We say, yes, people will always die. But what does that have to do with me? I'm living fine right now. I'm still young. Even if I get old, I still have quite a few years. That they dilutes the suffocating anxiety of death in this way. It tells us death is a natural law, everyone dies, so don't take it too seriously. This comfort sounds thoughtful, but actually, it deprives you of the most precious right as an independent individual. That is the right to die. Sounds absurd, right? Does dying need a right? Heidegger tells you, yes. Because in this world, many things can be substituted. I can find someone to work for me, find someone to wait in line for me, even to some extent, find someone to think for me. But there is one thing that no one in this world can do for you. That is, your death. No matter how much money you have, no matter how much power you have, the moment you face death, you must bear it alone. Your parents can't substitute for you, your lover can't substitute for you, that omnipotent they can't substitute for you. Death is absolutely foremost. It belongs absolutely to you alone. It is the most unique, inalienable possibility in your life. Heidegger plays a very high-level word game here. He says death is not just the end of life, it is the end of possibility. At the same time, it is also the most extreme possibility. What does this mean? As long as you are alive, you always have all kinds of possibilities. You can change jobs, you can travel, you can learn a foreign language. But death hangs over your head. It tells you that all these possibilities have a final boundary. That is the impossibility of existence. Precisely because of this boundary, every choice you make right now has weight. Imagine if we really were like the legendary immortals, living forever, never dying. What would life become? It would be an utter disaster. Because if time is infinite, then now is meaningless. I can push everything to tomorrow because there is always another tomorrow after tomorrow. I don't need to make choices because I can try every option. In infinite time, everything becomes equivalent. Everything becomes boring. Everything becomes meaningless. Precisely because we will die, precisely because our time is limited, every decision we make appears so precious. You chose to be a doctor, which means you gave up being a painter. You chose to live in this city, which means you gave up wandering. Because your time is not enough for you to do everything, so you must choose. This forced choice is the weight of your life. And those who fall into the world of the day, they pretend they won't die, so they never truly make choices. They drift with the tide because they think time is cheap, it's infinite ticking clock time. But when you start being towards death, when you accept from the bottom of your heart the fact that I will eventually die alone, a miracle happens. That anxiety that dragged you out of the pile of the day suddenly turns into a massive force. You are no longer afraid of being maverick because you know those people pointing fingers at you can't save your life, and you can't take their judgments with you. You no longer tangle with those trivial matters because in the face of death, that bit of face, that bit of vanity, that bit of office intrigue is simply as light as a feather. You start to re-examine your life. You ask yourself, if I were to die tomorrow, is the life I'm living now really what I want? Do I really want to be this IT consultant working overtime every day, Or is it because everyone says this job is respectable? Do I really love this person I met at the dance, or is it because everyone says it's time to get married? Under the searchlight of death, all hypocrisy has nowhere to hide. Heidegger calls this state, this clarity gained by facing death directly, resoluteness. Or authentic resoluteness. This isn't saying you suddenly become decisive and commanding, but that you finally take back the various possibilities of your own life. You are no longer passively waiting for things to happen, you are actively projecting your future. This is the true meaning of being towards death. It is running ahead into death, rehearsing that finale in advance, and then with the perspective of that finale, turning back to live every minute of the present anew. It's like looking at the last page of the walkthrough before playing a game. You know the ending is destined to be game over. But precisely because you know the ending, you want to play the process in between even more splendidly, playing out your own style instead of playing according to someone else's save file. This attitude towards life is what Heidegger calls authenticity. Many friends might misunderstand, thinking authenticity means letting oneself go, doing whatever one wants, getting hungover, wandering, fighting against society. No, that's too superficial. Heidegger believes that an authentic life doesn't necessarily have to be deviant in form. You can continue to be your IT consultant, you can continue to be your housewife. The difference lies in, before, you were doing these things as they, doing them to meet others' expectations. Now, you are doing them as an independent individual being towards death. You chose this life yourself. You endowed this job, this family, with meaning that belongs to you. Even if you are a cleaner, if you clearly know this is an experience you actively chose in your limited life, then you are 10,000 times more authentic than those CEOs sitting in Wall Street office buildings counting money while complaining about life. Speaking of this, we need to introduce another extremely subversive concept in Heidegger's philosophy, which is directly related to his book title Being and Time. That is, time. You might say, I understand time. Isn't it past, present, future? Isn't it the ticks on the clock? Isn't it that uniformly flowing axis in Newtonian physics? If you think this way, you are still living in inauthentic time. In Heidegger's view, physical time, clock time, is not original time at all. That is just a sequence of nows being measured. For a person fallen in that world of the day, time is a series of nows. The past is the now that has disappeared. The future is the now that hasn't arrived. They live in the moment, but this moment is superficial. They are busy dealing with things in front of them, messing around here and there. Today repeats yesterday, tomorrow repeats today. They have no real future because their future is just the continuation of today. They have no real past either because the past is just days that will be forgotten if the calendar isn't turned. But, for a being towards death, authentic Dasein, the structure of time undergoes an earth-shaking change. Heidegger believes that authentic time does not flow from the past to the future. Instead, it flows from the future to the present, and then returns to the past. Dizzy? Don't worry, let me straighten it out for you. When you are being towards death, you first see that most extreme future, death. That future isn't something that hasn't happened yet, it is influencing you right now. It is like a giant magnet attracting you from the future. Because you see that finale, future, you generate the resoluteness of the moment, present. And to realize this resoluteness, you need to mobilize your existing experiences and resources, past. See that? It is the future determining the present, not the past determining the present. Let's use a colloquial example. Suppose you decide to become a top pianist in 3 years. This becoming a pianist is your future. Although it hasn't happened yet, it has already substantially determined what you are doing now. It makes you give up playing games now and sit in front of the piano practicing boringly. At the same time, it also makes you re-excavate those pasts where you learned music theory as a child. In this process, future, present, and past are entangled together. They are a unified whole. Heidegger calls this unified structure temporality, Zeitlichkeit. So he says Dasein is temporality itself. We don't live inside the container of time, we are time. Our life is a parabola extending towards the future. And that endpoint, death, is precisely the key that gives this parabola its shape. If you don't have that anticipatory grasp of the future, your life is a mess, a pile of countless unrelated moments. Only when you possess this authentic view of time can you truly possess history. Here we must mention that concept that gives many people a headache: historicity. Many people think history is just those dry years and chronicles in textbooks, just records of things that happened in the past. But in Heidegger's view, that is called historiography, not historicity. How does an authentic Dasein view history? He doesn't see himself as a puppet determined by the past. For example, oh, my family of origin is bad, so I'm miserable now. Oh, I was born in that era, so I had no chance to get an education. This tone, in Heidegger's view, is typical inauthenticity. It is treating oneself as a present-at-hand object, a billiard ball pushed by the law of causality. A truly awakened person, a person possessing authentic historicity, uses the future to illuminate the past. He will look back, within that fate he was thrown into, within that imperfect past, to dig for strength, to find those possibilities that can be inherited and reshaped. This is what Heidegger calls destiny. Destiny here is not fatalism. It doesn't mean you are destined to do something. It means you admit the starting point you were thrown into. You admit your skin color, your nationality, your family background. These are the facticity you cannot change. But you accept them not to bow down to them, but to use them as fuel for your journey to the future. You want to inherit this past, but this inheritance is a critical inheritance, a kind of repetition. You want to, in a new era, use your own way to relive those valuable things from the past with new brilliance. It's like being dealt a bad hand of cards. The inauthentic person complains about the dealer and wants to throw the cards away. The authentic person carefully studies the hand, uses the rules, even uses the opponent's psychology to play this bad hand to the most splendid ending. This sense of power is the core of Heidegger's philosophy. He isn't teaching you to escape, nor teaching you to resign yourself to fate. He is teaching you that after recognizing the truth of life, you still have the courage to bear that unique destiny that belongs to you. Speaking of this, we have not only solved the who am I problem, but we also incidentally solved that loneliness problem that has troubled us for a long time. Remember that tale we left earlier? When anxiety drags you out of the world of the they and turns you into a lonely individual, are we destined to be lonely forever? Are we destined to live in solitude like a freak to be an authentic person? Of course not. A variant of Heidegger's famous cave allegory is waiting for us here. You walked out of the first layer cave of the they. You saw the strong light of death. You are independent. You are awakened. But this doesn't mean you have to stay away from the crowd, even physically. On the contrary, you must go back. You must go back into that cave. You must go back to your job post. You must go back to your family. But this return is completely different from before. Before, you were fallen in it, you were that blindly following they. Now, you are returning to this community actively as an authentic Dasein possessing independent will, clear goals, and knowing you will eventually die. You are still with everyone. You still live a seemingly ordinary life. But your internal state has taken a qualitative leap. You are no longer passively drifting with the flow, you are actively bearing it. You start to not only be responsible for yourself but also start to be responsible for this community. This leads to another grand dimension in Heidegger's philosophy. That is, destiny of a people or community. If fate is individual historicity, then the destiny is the historicity of the community. In the process of pursuing authenticity, we not only discovered our own fate, but we also discovered we are part of a larger historical process. We belong to a certain people, a certain culture, a certain era. An authentic person does not cut off this connection. On the contrary, he bears this destiny more profoundly. He will think, in this era, in this community, what possibilities can I, this unique individual, contribute to this historical process? How can I repeat the traditions of our people and culture into new brilliance in the future? Does this sound a bit like a heroic narrative? That's right. In a sense, Heidegger is calling for an existential heroism. Not the kind of superhero wearing a cape to save the world, but every ordinary person choosing to stand straight and live an examined, responsible life with historical depth when facing destined death. Friends, having spoken to this point, we have completed a journey from the micro to the macro. We started from a plucked chicken, talked about being, talked about hammers, talked about the annoying they, talked about the terrifying anxiety. Then talked about death as the antidote, and finally we stood on the peak of time and history. You might feel, wow, this is already very complete. Heidegger's thought is probably just this, right? No. We are just getting started. The reason Heidegger is called one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century is that his ambition went far beyond this. He not only wanted to dissect individual existence, but he also wanted to dissect the illness of the entire era. He wanted to ask a sharper question. Why do we modern people, despite reading so many books and understanding so many principles, still feel so tired, so empty, so rootless? Why is our technology getting more advanced, our phones getting smarter, yet we feel further and further away from reality? This isn't just a personal problem. This is a massive misunderstanding that the entire Western civilization has walked into for 2,000 years. This is the issue Heidegger focused on most in his later years, the essence of technology and the oblivion of being. Below, we will follow Heidegger out of the small world of the individual to examine this modern world heavily besieged by technology. We are going to see why Heidegger said, science does not think. Everyone is holding a phone right now, or sitting in front of a computer. We live in an era completely wrapped in technology. If I ask you, how do you view technology? You might say, technology is a tool. It is neutral. Look at this knife. Cutting vegetables is good, killing people is bad. The key lies in the person using it. Or you might be a bit more optimistic. You might believe in technological salvationism like many people. Oh, the earth is warming, the wealth gap is large, but don't worry. There will be better AI later, there will be controllable nuclear fusion. Technology developing to the end will definitely solve all current problems. If you think this way, Heidegger is going to splash cold water on you again, a basin of water with ice shards in it. He believes our view of technology is completely superficial. One could even say that precisely this superficial view allows us to slide step by step into the abyss. Heidegger isn't the kind of old fogey who insists on looking into your eyes when video calling. He didn't simply oppose technology. What he opposed was, we fundamentally haven't understood what the essence of technology is. We think technology is just a means, just a tool to achieve a certain end. For example, I want to drink water, the cup is technology. I want to go far, the car is technology. This definition isn't wrong, but it is incomplete. To dig out the root of technology, Heidegger took us back to that etymological archaeological site. He dug out a word from Greek, techne. This word in ancient Greece didn't just refer to technology, it simultaneously referred to art, to the craftsmanship of an artisan. Its core meaning is revealing. That is, bringing those hidden things into the light, making them manifest. Does this sound abstract? Let's look at an example. In ancient times, when a silversmith crafted a silver chalice, how did he do it? He had to consider four things, which are Aristotle's four causes. First is the material cause, the silver itself. Second is the formal cause, the shape of the chalice. Third is the final cause, whether this chalice is used for sacrifice or drinking. Fourth is the efficient cause, the silversmith, the creator. In Heidegger's view, these four factors are responsible to each other. They gather together like a gentle gathering. The silversmith isn't the supreme ruler. He is more like a midwife. He listens to the voice of the silver, complies with its grain, and brings forth that potential silver chalice from the silver. This is a poetic construction. This is a process called poetic creation. In this process, man, nature, and tools coexist harmoniously. But, friends, please open your eyes and look at current technology. Look at our so-called modern technology. Is it still that gentle bringing forth? Absolutely not. Heidegger used a very violent word to describe modern technology. That is, challenging. Modern technology no longer complies with nature. It is setting upon nature. It makes unreasonable demands on nature, ordering nature to hand over energy and storing this energy to be on standby at any time. Using an example again. How did farmers plant land before? He was taking care of the soil. He sowed, then waited. He left the growth of crops to the seasons, to the rain. When he harvested, his heart carried gratitude. This is called not challenging the soil of the field. But what about modern mechanized agriculture? It treats the land as a production workshop. It doesn't care if the land is tired, nor if the season is right. Fertilizers, pesticides, GMOs. All means have only one goal: yield. The land is no longer a mother. The land has become a factor of production, a resource that can be squeezed for profit. Look at that famous Rhine River again. In the poet's pen, it is the blood of the earth, scenery, a source of inspiration. But in the eyes of a modern hydroelectric plant, what is the Rhine? It is merely a provider of water pressure. Even its aspect as a tourist attraction is placed there to satisfy the vacation needs of the tourism industry. Heidegger invented a word to describe this state called inframing. It means we put a huge, invisible frame or rack over the whole world. In this frame, all things are no longer themselves. They become a kind of inventory, a standing reserve. This tree is no longer a life standing in the wind and rain, it is wood pulp reserve for the paper mill. This stone is no longer a witness to geological movements of millions of years, it is concrete raw material for the construction site. This scenery is no longer a destination for peace of mind, it is a traffic reserve for influencer check-in points. In the logic of modern technology, the world has become a giant gas station. Everything has only one value: how can it be used? How much profit can it bring? You might say, what's wrong with this? We humans need to survive and develop. Of course, we have to utilize nature. Isn't this human progress? Friends, this is exactly the most terrifying part. If we get used to treating everything in nature as resources that can be calculated, utilized, and reserved, then, can humans, who are part of nature, escape this? Go to any big company now and look at what the department responsible for recruitment and management is called. It's called human resources. Listen to this term. Human resources. Like coal, oil, timber, you are also a resource. In that huge inframing, you are no longer a Dasein with flesh and blood, emotion, capable of being towards death. You are a datum, a man-hour, a labor reserve that can be optimized, substituted, or even destocked. This is why you feel alienated. Why you feel like a screw in the company. Because in the eyes of modern technology, you are a part. Heidegger keenly pointed out that this way of looking at the world didn't just change nature. Conversely, it reformatted our brains. We started to think only in one way. That is, calculative thinking. Before making any decision, what do we think about first? Cost effectiveness. Input-output ratio. Efficiency. We calculate when dating, does this person have a house and car? Are their genes good? Will they be helpful to me later? We calculate when making friends, is this person effective social networking? Can they expand my connections? We even calculate when resting, can I learn knowledge by scrolling this video? Is playing this game a waste of time? We think we are thinking. Actually, we are just doing cost-benefit analysis like a computer. Heidegger calls this thinking calculation. An opposite to it, that thinking that asks about meaning, asks about being, asks why, is called meditative thinking. Regrettably, in this technological age, calculative thinking is devouring all meditative thinking like a virus. Heidegger even predicted that even if the atomic bomb doesn't explode, even if World War III doesn't break out, humanity might face a catastrophe. Because if one day we only know how to calculate and no longer think, if one day we completely forget we are Dasein being towards death and only remember we are human resources, then, although biological humans are still alive, the humanity is human, that species capable of feeling poetry and asking about being, will have gone extinct. This is the greatest danger of the technological age. It isn't robot rebellion in Terminator, nor being used as batteries in the Matrix. It is this silent, boiling frog-style oblivion of being. We live in this world full of screens, full of data, full of efficiency, living more and more like machines. We call this modern life. We think we are masters of technology. We hold phones, feeling we possess the whole world. But Heidegger would coldly tell you, no. You are not the master. You are a port in this huge technological system. When you are scrolling through your phone, actually big data is scrolling through you. When you consume content, actually you, as a attention resource, are being consumed by advertisers and platforms. We are tethered to these devices, closer to them than to the earth beneath our feet, closer than to the sky above our heads. We forgot how to feel the temperature of the soil like a farmer. We forgot how to listen to the voice of matter like a silversmith. We only know challenging, promoting. Faster. Faster. Higher efficiency. Greater output. This is why Heidegger says, science does not think. This isn't belittling scientists. This is saying science and modern technology only care about how. They only care about efficiency and function. They never ask, and cannot ask, why. They cannot think about questions of meaning. And this is precisely the task of philosophy. Precisely the task of each of us. Now, you might feel a wave of despair. If the whole world has become a giant gas station, if every one of us is destined to become human resources, is there any hope for us? Should we smash computers, burn phones, and go back to the deep mountains and old forests to be savages? Heidegger certainly wasn't that childish. He knew we can't go back. The wheels of history roll forward, modern technology has become our destiny. We cannot simply discard it. But this doesn't mean we can only sit and wait for death. In his later years, Heidegger struggled to ponder a question: in this dark night where technology rules everything, where is there a glimmer of light? Where is there redemption? He looked in ancient Greek tragedies. He looked in Hölderlin's poetry. Finally, he quoted a line from Hölderlin to respond to this desperate era. But where the danger is, grows the saving power also. What does this sentence mean? Does it mean technology itself can save us? No. Not technology itself. But when we profoundly realize the danger of technology, when we are forced to the edge of the cliff and have to stop and think, that turning point, that salvation, will appear. So, what exactly is this saving power? How can we find that lost being and that poetic dwelling earth without throwing away phones and computers? The final prescription Heidegger gave might seem both unexpected and reasonable to you. That is, art. And a completely new, or perhaps the most ancient, attitude of thought, which is Gelassenheit, translated as releasement or letting be. This German word is hard to translate. It contains multiple meanings of putting down, letting it go, calmness. When dealing with the tidal wave of technology, this is an extremely high-level psychological state. Many people think opposing technology means throwing away phones and moving to the mountains to drill wood for fire. Heidegger says that is childish. Because modern technology has become our destiny, we cannot solve the problem by simple escape. And technology does bring us convenience. We cannot deny this. So what is Gelassenheit? It is an attitude of yes and no. We can use technical objects, we can utilize them, but at the same time, we must maintain an independence deep in our hearts. We must refuse to let them serve as the entirety of our existence. We must refuse to let them devour our inner selves. We can say yes to the inevitable use of technology, while simultaneously saying no to its demand that we completely obey, to its nature that twists us into treating everything as a resource. This attitude is like a martial arts master. He moves through the flash of swords and shadows, but his heart is still. He uses the sword, but he is not the sword's slave. We scroll through phones, we work with ChatGPT, we enjoy the convenience brought by algorithms. But we must remain awake at all moments. This is just a tool. This is not life itself. This is just a means. This is not the end. We must draw a boundary for these technological objects in our hearts. We can let them enter our lives, but absolutely not let them enter our souls. This letting it go, this putting down, is the most powerful resistance against the technological world. It preserves a divine clearing for us, a private plot of the soul unpolluted by calculation and enframing. Besides this mental adjustment, Heidegger pointed out another road to truth for us. That is, art. In Heidegger's view, art is absolutely not just aesthetics, absolutely not just decorations hanging on the wall or entertainment for relaxation. Art is the happening of truth. It is the unconcealment of being. Remember the shoes we talked about earlier? If you ask a shoe factory boss what shoes are, he will tell you, this is a combination of leather, rubber, glue. This is a commodity. This is inventory. This is a resource measured by money. This is the technological perspective. But if you look at the pair of peasant shoes painted by Van Gogh, that is something completely different. In that painting, you see not just a pair of shoes. You see the mud these shoes stepped on in the earth. You see the fatigue when twilight falls. You see the joy of harvest. You see the wordlessness of life and death. In that moment, these shoes are no longer a cold equipment. They become a condensation point of a living world. The artwork opens up a world. It lets us see the true face of things, not the resource face distorted by technology. When we are immersed in a great poem, when we gaze at an ancient temple, when we are moved to tears by a piece of music, what happens? The logic of technology fails. You can't calculate how much efficiency this poem has. You can't measure how much output this temple has. In that moment, we break away from the control of calculative thinking. We return to the meditative thinking. We refeel the mystery and solemnity of being. This is why Heidegger praised poetry so much in his later years, especially Hölderlin's poems. He believed poets are the watchmen of divinity. In the dark night where the gods have departed, it is the poet guarding the last glimmer, guarding the purity of language for us, guarding that unspeakable mystery for us. Heidegger often said language is the house of being. But in the technological age, what has language become? It became information. It became data. It became a tool for transmitting instructions. Our current language is pale, functional, full of abbreviations, full of memes, full of emotional venting. Poetry makes language return to itself, makes language regain the power to name sacred things. So, friends, if you feel suffocated living in this technological world, go read a poem. Go listen to a concert. Or simply go into nature and gaze at a tree like looking at Van Gogh's painting. In that moment, you have broken out of the prison of enframing. This immediately leads to one of the most beautiful concepts in Heidegger's later years. Poetic dwelling. This sentence also comes from Hölderlin, full of merit, yet poetically man dwells upon this earth. What is a dwelling? Modern people have housing problems. We buy houses, rent houses, speculate on houses. We live in grids of reinforced concrete. We call this residing. But in Heidegger's view, this is not dwelling. This is just occupying space. True dwelling is a kind of caring, a kind of preserving. In German, the word for dwelling has etymological connections with peace and freedom. Dwelling means preserving a thing in its own essence, not harming it, not forcing it. What is our current way of living like? We level mountains, fill rivers, pull out grass and pave with cement. We press a switch to make the room spring-like all year round. This is a challenging nature. This is not dwelling. The dwelling in Heidegger's heart is a harmonious dance with the fourfold whole of earth, sky, divinities, mortals. This is his most mysterious the fourfold theory in his later years. We live in a house. We must be able to see the waxing and waning of the sky. We must be able to feel the heavy bearing of the earth. We must be able to revere those unknowable divinities. At the same time, we must accept our destiny as mortals, those who will die. None of these can be missing. If you seal off the earth, if you obscure the sky, if you drive away the gods, if you forget you will die, then even if you live in a mansion worth hundreds of millions, you are homeless. You are just a vagrant living in a box. Poetic dwelling doesn't mean you must write poetry or decorate your home in a pastoral style. It is an attitude of existence. When you are willing to stop and listen to the sound of the wind, wait for flowers to bloom, be grateful for every meal, at that time, no matter where you live, you are poetically dwelling. You have found a true home on the earth. Finally, we arrive at the ultimate suspense of Heidegger's thought. In that interview with Der Spiegel magazine published only after his death, he left a deafening testament. Only a God can save us. Na noch ein Gott kann uns retten. This sentence confused countless people. Did this great philosopher turn into a religious fanatic in the end? Which God is he waiting for? Is it Jesus? Is it Zeus? No. The God Heidegger speaks of is not a God in any specific religion. What he is speaking of is a return to a dimension of divinity. It is a re-reverence for the mystery. What is the biggest problem of our era? It is disenchantment. Science and technology illuminate everything too brightly. No shadows. No secrets. No unknowns. We think we control everything. We think as long as there is enough data, there are no unsolvable puzzles. But Heidegger tells us, this illusion of omniscience and omnipotence is the root of our arrogance, and the beginning of our destruction. When the world loses its sense of mystery, when the world loses that trembling sacredness, humanity loses reverence. Without reverence, we dare to do anything. We dare to blow the earth to smithereens. We dare to mess up human genes chaotically. The God Heidegger calls for is actually that power we cannot control, cannot calculate, cannot predict. He is waiting for a new beginning. Waiting for us humans to admit our smallness. Admitting that outside of technology and calculation, there is a grander, unspeakable being watching us. This is a return to humility. Only when we admit we are not the masters of the world, only when we are willing to maintain a state of readiness to listen in this technological dark night, is it possible for that saving power to descend. Finally, I want to end this long journey with the advice Heidegger gave to that student. This might also be the most practical and affectionate advice in the entire history of philosophy. If you feel lost in life, if you feel you can't find yourself in this noisy world, if you want to know how to truly live authentically, don't go listen to success lectures. Don't watch motivational short videos. Go to the cemetery. Even if just for a walk. Spend some time standing in front of those silent tombstones. Look at those names that were once as fresh as you, as anxious as you, as full of desire as you, but have now returned to dust. There, under that shadow of death, you will hear the truest voice of life. You will understand what must be grasped and what can be let go. You will understand, since the end is destined, then every breath in this moment, every heartbeat, every act of loving and being loved, is so incredible. So worthy of us spending it affectionately, poetically, and with Gelassenheit. Thank you everyone. I am your friend, Raymond Shadow. Let us meet again in the clearing of being. If you are willing, please like, subscribe, and forward this to your friends. Thank you for listening.